Hey, have you ever heard of the West? Probably not. In general, it relates to anything that is currently less east than you are, but in the 1800s, the American West was a place of untapped potential, which led to a bunch of people expanding westward during the Western expansion. Because of this, things like the Homestead Act and the Pacific Railway Act came into being, the former of which gave any American 160 acres of western land, and they are even allowed to stay there as long as they were able to make improvements to that land within 5 years of residing in that area. The latter granted the Union Pacific and Central Pacific Railroad companies 6,000 acres of land to build a transcontinental railroad, which was something that Theodore Juden wanted to do since before the Civil War. The Central Pacific guys started in January 1863, just outside of Sacramento, California, with the help of 10,000 workers, 6,000 of which were Chinese immigrants. The Union Pacific started a little bit later than expected on account of a few scandalous goings-on, but they eventually start in Omaha, Nevada. Unfortunately for everybody involved, the train has to go through the Great Plains, which means it's bad for the Indians, which means it's also bad for the workers. But we'll get to that later. Meanwhile, the Central Gang is getting along quite nicely, currently going through the Sierra Mountains, which makes progress a tad bit slow, like 2 feet a day slow. Partly because they have to keep stopping to blow a bunch of stuff up, but also because the Chinese workers are going on strike, which is like 6/10 of their workforce. Anyway, the railroads eventually meet up in Utah where, after a few drunken shenanigans, the Golden Spike completes the project in the May of 1869 before it is promptly removed and replaced with a normal spike. Yo, what's that? Oh yeah, it's 1874 now, and General Custer is sending surveyors to the Black Hills for potential white settlements and gold. Well, as it turns out, the Black Hills are a sacred area to the Native Americans, but my man Custard isn't too concerned. He can take a few dumb natives, and now all his men have been mutilated to death. And now he's been mutilated to death. But you know what they always say, you can mutilate some, but you can't mutilate them all. So before you know it, a whole bunch of Indians have been rounded up, taken to the Trail of Tears, and put into Indian reservation camps. Okay, so I couldn't think of an actual transition to this last topic, so let's just pretend that I could, yeah? The myth of the cowboy. Basically, as more people began moving out into the West, the more the West was thought of as this lawless land of tough, rugged men fighting for the greater good or whatever. And then Flint Westlog started making Western movies, which just perpetuated the myth, etc., etc., etc. Okay, goodbye now.